And let's go ahead and turn to Mike Jette. Welcome, Mike.
Well, thank you, Michael. Welcome. Good evening.
I will note that Mr. Jette is running in the Democratic primary for the Pima County Attorney's Office, for the Democratic nomination for the Pima County Attorney's Office. And I will allow him to do the honors of introducing himself and saying hi.
Thanks, Michael. Is this a good opportunity for me just to tell everyone about myself? So,
Absolutely.
Michael, I want to first of all extend my gratitude for giving me a venue to with DGT, and I appreciate everyone in the audience for attending. And I want this to be a conversation. So, if there's questions, I more than welcome the questions. So, a lot of people ask, "Who am I?" and stuff. So, let me just tell you, I'm kind of close to a native Tucsonian. I moved here in 2001. I had a brother who got sick here, and so I moved to Tucson, and I've been in Tucson since 2001. Um, I come from a mediocre family. I'm a triplet. If people don't know that, but and I come from a Marine Corps family. My parents live in Montana on a ranch, and so I got some deep heart values instilled into me. I'm married, been married almost 19 years, and she is a professor at the University of Arizona. I have a bachelor's degree from the University of Oregon. I have a law degree from Lewis and Clark in Portland. I wanted to be an environmental lawyer when I first went to law school. When I moved to Tucson, I went to Thunderbird to get my master's in business, and I also have a master's in international security. So it seems like I got a lot of degrees when I start rattling them off. So that's my education. My community involvement, I think, is important for people to understand who I am because I'm really a community activist. I sat on the Tucson Museum of Art board for roughly 6 years. I was the president of the board of directors for Tucson Clean and Beautiful, which is a environmental group here in Tucson. I was on the United Way Senior Coalition Task Force. I even was an HOA president. We keep that quiet though. I also was a Special Olympics coach and a mock trial instructor for the Gregory School. And let me just get to the heart of it, my experience. And so some of you may know, for those who don't know, I've been prosecuting for approximately 16 years. I started off at a small county in the border, Santa Cruz County, and I was a victim prosecutor, prosecuting things from sex crimes to homicides and burglaries and human smuggling. And so that was Santa Cruz County. I moved over to the Arizona Attorney General's office where I specialized in white collar crime, large cases, and conflict cases from the county. Some of the cases I prosecuted were the mayor of Nogales. I prosecuted a couple of cops, the largest copper heist, I think in the US, but definitely in Arizona. And I was also responsible for the Rio Nuevo probe back in the day. I moved over to the U.S. Attorney's Office into the white collar unit, and from there I continued on doing large white collar financial cases. I did cases on elder fraud, large. I did a probably the only ranch cattle rustling case in Arizona, $3.5 million in losses for a cattle company. And I was able to travel the world for DOJ. In fact, DOJ sent me over to Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, the Philippines, and finally in Pakistan. I just recently returned from about 2.5 years in Pakistan, about 3 months ago, and my job overseas was to establish and create prosecution offices, train prosecutors, work on terrorism cases and cases with a U.S. nexus, and even was fortunate enough to help a female Afghan judge avoid the Taliban in Afghanistan. I returned from Pakistan, and I immediately decided I'm going to resign and run for Pima County Attorney, and here I am. So that was in a nutshell, Michael. That's my background in a nutshell. Oh, and currently I am still prosecuting. I'm working on a case. Some of you may or may not know, but I'm the lead prosecutor on a case in Santa Cruz County, the the rancher who has been charged with shooting a undocumented alien on his property. So I'm lead prosecutor on that case down in Santa Cruz. So like I said, I want this to be an open dialogue and for people to get to know me, and I can answer questions and so forth.
Carolyn has in fact asked a question. She wants to know, why are you running against the incumbent Pima County attorney in the Democratic primary?
Well, that's a good question. I appreciate that. And so it goes back to people. Some people know this, but back in 2011, I was a victim of a pretty bad burglary, and I understood what it's like to lose your voice and lose control. I was a prosecutor at the time, but I had no control, no voice. And when Barbara Lawal's office turned the case down, it just infuriated me. I remember that feeling as a victim, not having voice, not having control. So when I went to Pakistan, people remember that I was thinking about running for county attorney back in 2012. And so when I returned from Pakistan and I look at the landscape here with the office with fewer prosecutions, fewer convictions, I'm hearing victim story after victim story. I understand what that feels like from a victim. And you read about the conflict issues with the Lewis Taylor case. You hear about cases of Remington and the Hardesty murder, and so you read these things and you hear these things, you start feeling those things. And I said, with my experience, my background, I'm going to try to do something different for Pima County. I'm going to try to bring forth my education, my experience, and my passion to help improve Pima County. So that's the real reason I'm running for county attorney.
Okay. Well, I would follow up on that and say, are there specific distinctions between you and the current incumbent philosophically in the approach to the prosecution of crimes here in Pima County that have compelled you to want to run?
Well, I think the first one is I'm a career prosecutor, so there's a forward lean to me, and so I lean and I want to make sure people are held accountable. Now, for sentencing, well, for sure, we'll empathize and be compassionate with sentencing, but my philosophy is to forward lean. I want to hold people accountable who victimize victims and give victims voices. So that's number one. And number two is I can tackle the largest cases and the biggest cases. So Pima County no longer needs to outsource some of these difficult cases because those are the ones that need to stay in Pima County. Those are the ones that we can handle in Pima County. And so, and then number three, I think there's just a difference on how we approach the office. How prosecutors don't make statements to jeopardize cases. Prosecutors don't compromise investigations. And so those are the things that I value more. The big thing, and on top of that, we just don't have the same number of. We have a massive turnover in the office, and one glaring thing is I would never have a prosecutor sign a non-disclosure agreement. And so, I mean, those are things about transparency, about running an office, and about being upfront with the constituents. And so, those are the things that are some of the things upfront that are different between me and Ms. Conover.
One of the things I heard in your response there was, I don't know, are you actually planning on personally handling some of these cases? It sounds like you were saying, I am personally going to handle some of these more difficult cases, so we won't have to outsource them to other prosecutors. Is that, am I hearing that incorrectly?
I meant that as an office, but for sure, if there is a case of high profile case, I am not beyond doing a case myself. Now, obviously, I've got to run an office. I have to do
Yeah, it's a
day
lot
to
of
day
work.
of the office. So if I'm never saying never, but this is what we train prosecutors, have the right people in place, and so I would hope to recruit, train, and have those people at the same caliber. I mean, that office had some of the most experienced prosecutors in the state, and so I want to rise that kind of caliber back up. I mean, it used to be, I don't know if the listeners know this, but the last year under Barbara Lawal, there was roughly 70 prosecutors in the office. Today, there's 45. And so you have a lot of turnover, a lot of people who exited the building. And so that's a concern, especially if you're a victim of a crime and your case doesn't get prosecuted. That's a concern. So
All right. So what I'm hearing there is uh, there were 70 prosecutors, now there's 45. Do we have a budget for 70 now that we're not using? Is that what I'm hearing?
I don't know what is. I mean, I think a lot of money is outsourced. A lot of money is used for outsource consultants and attorneys. I don't know the financial makeup of it. However, I think money needs to be given to attorneys and support staff to prosecute cases. So when there is a crime, someone needs to be held accountable, and you have to have a prosecutor and support staff to adjudicate that case fairly and quickly. And so,
Gotcha. All right. We have a couple questions in the chat. Rick Unklesby wonders, have you seen specific failings in the current office? And he also wants to know, where in Montana is your ranch? His wife is native there.
oh, the Bitterroot Valley, and so just outside Missoula, and so that's where my family has a ranch. Um, Specific failings, well, I mean, you can go. I mean, it just recently the federal court just issued an order on the Lewis Taylor case, and that is like the most glaring problem. I mean, it's just in your face problem, and so you have a county attorney who during her campaign she ran with statements of saying she worked on the case. She thinks Lewis Taylor was unjustly prosecuted, innocent. I don't want to put words in her mouth, but paraphrasing, that's the language. So lesson number one: prosecutors never comment on an ongoing case or investigation or litigation. Rule number one: never comment. And so during the campaign, she commented. And now when you're in the office and this Lewis Taylor case is bubbling up, we've got massive problems. We have a problem with re-victimizing victims. There's a calling victims saying we're going to, you know, vacate the guilty, the no contest plea of Lewis Taylor. Then you retract that, and so you put the victims on yo-yo, and so you don't do that to victims. And number two is the hundreds and thousands of dollars in litigation costs outsourced just to defend what is going on with that office and her comments. And number three, probably the most important, you've just interfered with Lewis Taylor's efforts for justice. And so I'm not commenting on Lewis Taylor's case and his subject matter. However, when you comment and you interfere, you jeopardize legitimate efforts from a defendant to seek justice in his name. And so what you've done now is you've muddied the water. Now we've got waist high in mud here with the county attorney's office because of the comments and the efforts she made to exonerate him and then not exonerate him. I mean, so it's like a yo-yo. I mean, that's the most glaring one, just right off the top there.
So we have a question from Amelia Kramer, who was actually a key part of that office back in the day. She wants to know how you will deal with nonviolent, non-dangerous people, arrestees for simple drug possession.
I'm going to throw them into one. Amelia Kramer was one of the stars of the Wall era, and she is probably the most progressive as far as drug rehab. And they created a wonderful program ranging from deflection all the way through DTAP. And the last stage, unfortunately, is prison, but there's 12 steps in between. And that's where we owe a duty to these individuals to help them get off that addiction. And so I want to throw as many people, non-violent, non-dangerous individuals into this to get them off addiction because they live in our community. We're neighbors with them. We want them off that drug because we don't want them to have the enticement to commit a crime later to fuel their addiction or break up their family. We understand there's collateral consequences for addiction. So we're going to throw as many as we can into this program, which includes deflection, the STEP program, drug court, BTAP, all these things. There's 12 steps here. And one of the things, I'm glad Amelia brought this up, but last year that Amelia Kramer was was there at the office, I believe there was over 1,000 people in that program. Under Ms. Conover, the top number, the largest number she's ever had in that program was just over 500. So you had a 50% reduction in the people who are in this drug rehab program that the county devised and has shown success. You have 50% fewer people in this program. So my effort would be increase. Throw them in there, and throw them in there. Because we all know addiction robs the personhood, it robs the family, and it robs our community. So I'm all in.
I want to know what you would do, Michael, in relationship to access to abortion in light of the situation in Arizona right now with the laws that are on the books. So can you talk to me about your understanding and what policies you would enact if you were the Pima County attorney?
Well, let me just start off by thank you for the question. Let me just start off by saying I am a pro-choice individual. So I've been pro-choice my entire life. So the question for what can the Pima County Attorney's Office do? Number one is we are not prosecuting a single person if they choose to have an abortion, regardless of state law. So I'm not prosecuting a woman, the husband, father, the doctor, the clinician, the clinics, the RNs, the Uber driver. No one gets prosecuted on that. I'd rather spend my resources on legitimate crime like burglaries and robberies and sex assaults. That's where my effort's going to be. So you will never see a person prosecuted if I was county attorney for having an abortion ever. I don't care what state law says.
Thank you very much.
Good. Thanks, Bridget. Looks like Nelson Tam has a question. What are your thoughts about diversion courts?
Diversion courts in what
Mhm.
capacity? Like, give me.
I'm not sure about the context there. Nelson, do you want to clarify?
Yeah, hey, good evening, everyone. I just feel like there is a push, at least where I am calling in from California, that there's a big, big political fight right now, right? A lot of prosecutors, like the one pictured here that I helped be a senior organizer for, she is facing a recall election, right? Because she wants to reduce, sentencing enhancements and she does want to implement a little bit more for restorative justice, right? Which includes diversion courts. And I was wondering, I know it's a much more difficult political landscape that you are operating in, but what type of implementation of diversion courts could you see implemented in your jurisdiction?
Sure, that's a good question. So I am for it all depends on the crime. It all depends if there's a victim, obviously victim input and what the harm is done to the victim. But I am all for increasing diversion opportunities. So for example, one idea is a defendant can plead guilty to X crime and you hold that the court does not accept the plea. And then once that person completes diversion requirements, say drug rehab, mental health or mental health issue, whatever the issue, anger management, the case gets dismissed. The case gets dismissed. So I'm all in for diversion. I'm all in for helping a person because the collateral consequences of a felony, the collateral consequences of losing a job, the collateral consequences of the family are tremendous. So I want to do my best to make sure that my neighbor here stays my neighbor and doesn't, it's not a continuation of a domino effect for generations to come because I threw someone in prison because of having possession of a drug when there's especially a nonviolent, no victim case. So I'm all in for diversion. I'm all for expanding diversion programs. It helps me out because I can focus in on more violent crime. It helps me out tremendously.
Looks like we actually have been joined by former Pima County Attorney Barbara Lawal. So welcome, Barbara.
Hi, I'm sorry I'm late.
Not at all. Did you have a question for Mike?
Not at this time.
Okay, thanks for coming. Appreciate it.
Once in a while.
Hi, Mike.
I have a question to follow up. I mean, some of those collateral consequences of a criminal charge, I mean, start as soon as the person is arrested. If you're stuck in jail and you can't make bail, you lose your job. You can't be with your family. You can't assist as effectively in your own defense. So there's been a lot of talk among progressive prosecutors. I don't know if you consider yourself one of those. But bail reform, cash bail reform, and use of pretrial detention. When you ask for pretrial detention, a lot of prosecutors are reevaluating how they approach that matter. Can you talk about that some?
Sure. This is an issue that's really kind of case dependent. So if we're talking, we need to silo these cases up. So we're assuming a non-dangerous crime here. So, for me as a prosecutor, I think I think anyone could probably look at my record. I think I can count on my hand how many times I asked for pretrial detention on a case. And what I mean by that is that not that I don't think pretrial detention is appropriate, is that's not my job. My job is to list out the factors for the court, failures to appear, flight risk, absconding, dangers to the community. Those are my two big ones. And then let the court decide on what the appropriate thing is. I do think it's important that we reduce how much cash bail we issue, and the court needs to be cognizant of the collateral consequence. So if there is a glaring problem with I will no problem instruct my prosecutors to tell the court we're okay with an OR, we're okay with a third party release. There is a tons of other mechanisms we could put in play because of the collateral consequences of jobs. Someone has a trucking job or something. I'm completely cognizant of that. It becomes a little bit more dicey when you have a victim involved, dangerous crime involved, and so it becomes a little bit more dicey with that. But there are probation does a wonderful job, wonderful service for the court. I really do think it's a court determination that determines that. Role of a prosecutor is to hold someone accountable. I don't do conditions of release, nor do I do sentencing. Those are two areas where the court decides. They get paid. They're the ones who wear the black robe. I'm the one holding them accountable, and I should not have a dog in the fight for pretrial release. I list out the conditions, the risk factors, and let the court decide on what those conditions are.
Mhm. I do have a question about use of discretion. I mean, you seem to indicate around the abortion rights that you have a very strong view of the discretion that a county attorney has in order to bring or not bring a case, even entire classes of cases. Are there other areas where you feel strongly that you need to use your discretion to either prosecute more aggressively or less aggressively as a matter of public policy in your office?
Well, one of the key things as prosecutors, we don't comment on. I can't comment on a general classification of cases. I mean, cases are different. They come with different fact patterns, especially when you talk about cases with victims and stuff. So there's no way. I mean, every case is going to be different. Every case is going to have a discretion. So you look at do we have the right evidence? Did the law enforcement do the right job? What's the victim input on these things? And what does the community standard dictate? And so we've got a lot of influences on whether or not you charge and don't charge a case. And so a lot of those things are in play. So I can't just blanket out. I mean, abortion is probably the easiest one because I just have a fundamental problem with interfering with a woman's right to choose. Outside of that, if there's a crime, I need to look at each of those cases individually. And so that's what we're going to have trained prosecutors to do. So I couldn't just make a blanket. But I just so you know, Michael, I've probably, as every prosecutor on this, if there's other prosecutors on the Zoom, is I have turned down more cases than I've prosecuted. I have turned down more cases. So that's a common thing with prosecutors. We often are, people don't think about this, but good, just prosecutors have a discretion to say, we're not prosecuting this case, we're not prosecuting that case. The evidence isn't there. The spirit of the law doesn't dictate this is what we should do here. So I will exercise my discretion in every single case.
Yeah, I'd actually push back on that a little bit. I mean, I don't think it's unethical for a prosecutor at this point when he's running for office to say, I'm going to de-emphasize a particular area of criminal penalties that I don't think contribute to public safety or welfare. For instance, you could say, I think a very common one is what they call lifestyle crimes. The kind of things that a homeless person might catch a lot of charges over. A prosecutor could quite fairly say, no, I'm going to de-emphasize these cases. These are not things that I think are making our community more safe. In fact, it might be making the community less safe. And I think you're doing that when it comes to an abortion, around abortions, because those laws are on the books, but yet you clearly indicate that that whole category is just right out. You're not going to prosecute them at all. So I think you can fairly comment on public policy areas where you think there should be more or less emphasis.
I didn't think it was even possible or even humane to prosecute someone who's homeless. So that is clearly not something that's it's not my queue. It's not in my agenda to prosecute someone. Homelessness is not a crime. So I'm not going to be prosecuting
It
people.
shouldn't be, but unfortunately, many
It's
times.
not going to, I didn't think that was even a possibility. So I'm not even, so if a case comes up and the crime is, quote, homelessness, it's not going to get prosecuted, Michael. It's not going to get prosecuted.
Loitering, jaywalking, camping,
Well, most of it's going to be misdemeanors with the city.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I'm not going to see those cases in my office. However, I mean, the drug possession cases are the ones I definitely de-emphasize on those. I mean, drug possession, like I told you, unless they're a candy store, like a house on the corner who's selling dope out of the house, or a guy who's lacing drugs with fentanyl. I mean, I'm going to treat drug possession as most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time as an addiction issue. So.
not seeing any additional questions in the chat at this time. Is there anybody who wants to ask Mike a question live? Just raise your hand and I'll call on you and you can unmute and ask your question. In the meantime, let's talk a little bit about death penalty. What are your views on the use of the death penalty, and if you have any differences between yourself and the current incumbent?
I don't think there's a big difference. Well, hold on. Let me scratch that. So I'm one of the only of the two here. I've actually had death cases that were death eligible, but chose not to seek the death penalty on cases. So I've never sought the death penalty. I never will seek the death penalty. I think Rick Unklesby is still on the line. He wrote a fantastic book, Not to Pimp. He did not think I was ever going to say this, but you can go on Amazon and buy Rick Unklesby's book on the death penalty, what a prosecutor's role in death penalties is. I think I agree. It's arbitrarily made it out, and I don't think it's appropriate. On top of that, it's super expensive. And so the amount of money we waste pursuing the death penalty on a case versus I can hire prosecutors and I can go after assault defendants who commit assaults and burglaries and robberies and sex offenses. I'd rather spend that. And if the guy wants to live in a box for the rest of his life and have 23 hours in confinement with 1 hour of rec time, that's okay with me versus seeking the death penalty on somebody. So I agree with Rick on how arbitrary it's been issued, and so I will stay away from the death penalty. There's no death penalty under my watch.
Yeah. Under our current administration, there has been some restructuring of the department. Can you talk about any areas of disagreement you might have with the way that our current incumbent has structured the office, and any ideas that you might have about what you might do to change the structure of the office?
I think the big structure change is they lost 30 plus attorneys. I mean, when you go from 70 plus down to 45, you're going to have to restructure heavier caseloads, and you can't keep talent. So my goal here is to recruit, keep talent, and prosecute. I like to install a more vertical prosecution office, and but sometimes high volume cases don't lend itself to that. So you have a horizontal, you have an issuing unit, a plea unit, and a trial unit. I come from the land of the vertical prosecutor where I charge and I live with the case all the way through trial and sentencing. So I rather have that method, and I will try to implement that, but those are difficult, especially on a high volume office like Pima County or Maricopa County. So those are the big things. But the number one thing is keep talent and recruit. That'd be the big thing for me.
Well, it sounds like I'm just interviewing you at this point. I really would encourage more questions from the audience, but since
Am I intimidating?
it is what it is.
Is that what I am? I'm intimidating. Is that what's going on?
Maybe. No.
Michael, this is Bridget Richetti, and I have a question. It's in the chat. So,
Okay. Oh, sorry, I didn't see that.
no worries. I'll ask it myself.
All right.
Michael, are you, have you been, let me ask the question this way. Have you had enough time since you announced your campaign to have a campaign structure, to have any endorsements? Can you tell us anything about that?
Well, I've been 3 weeks since I resigned from the U.S. Attorney's Office. So, and the first week it was getting acquainted with the case down south. So it's really been about 2 weeks. And so, do I have endorsements? The answer is yes. And so there are going to be people. I'll be updating the website with people who are endorsing for sure. And so there's a lot of people who know me. A lot of people. Those people are inside my bubble, if we want to call it my bubble, the defense bar, law enforcement officers, people who know the business. And so those endorsements are important, because if people don't know what the county attorney's office does or stay up to date with the office, they rely upon people who do. And so these are prosecutors and defense attorneys and law enforcement officers who know it. So matter of fact, I've got here's the kind of a unique situation. I've got one victim who is on my campaign team, and I got one defendant on my campaign team, a defendant I put in prison for 6 years, who's on my campaign team. So my campaign team is very diverse. And so I've got a lot of people on it. So.
Okay. Can you tell us what your website is?
It's MikeJette.com. Real simple, MikeJette.com.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I've been mispronouncing your name.
How you been pronouncing it?
Jet.
Oh, that's fine.
Jette. Okay, good to know. All right, it looks like Susie Anderson has a question. Susie, you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Mike. Okay, it's the Mike and Mike show.
Mike, yeah.
Yes. Okay. How long have you been in Arizona, in southern Arizona? And how familiar are you with, things like racial inequality in the jails and, all of those things that we tend not to talk about enough?
So I've been in Tucson since 2001. And so I've been here. Can you call me a quasi native? I'm not quite sure where it tips, where the number tips, because I know there's a lot of people from outside. So I came here in 2001, and because I went to school here, got some master's degrees here, and I work here, I consider Tucson my home. But as far as the discussion on minorities and incarceration, 100%, that shouldn't be brushed under the rug. I mean, that should be a topic in full frontal view. And so I'm 100% open to discussing the disparity between prosecuting minorities and the poor versus the wealthy and the white. And so I am all in for that discussion. So I'm aware of disparities numbers in the jail. I don't want to get caught in a quota game, a pure number game, because each of those cases need to be evaluated. And so, but those are discussions that are important to have as a community, right? We don't want to overcharge or over penalize a certain minority group in our society, in our community. We definitely don't want to be doing stuff like that. So
Okay. And how do you feel about bails and structuring of bail amounts for people who really cannot afford uh, to be in jail because they're living hand to mouth?
yeah, I 100% understand that problem. And as I told Michael earlier, is I don't think the prosecutor has a role unless there's a victim whose voice needs to be heard. My role as a prosecutor is to tell the court the factors to consider. If there is no flight risk and there's no danger to the community, I don't know why we're keeping someone in jail. If there's no flight risk or danger to the community, I'm not quite sure, because there's other methods of keeping someone. You can have a third party custodian, you can have a GPS tracker, you could have an array of other options available to the court. But a prosecutor shouldn't be going in there and saying, I want $1,000 bail or whatever. That's a fundamental. I have done that rarely in my 16 years. I have done that rarely.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about your history with the Democratic Party? Have you been involved in Democratic politics for very long?
So I'm glad this brought up. Are you going back to my 18th birthday? When I became 18, I became a voter. And so from the age of 18 all the way, I think, to like 32 years old, I was a registered Democrat. So I'm a universal health care guy, a pro-environment guy, a pro-choice guy. That's my party. When I became a prosecutor, I switched to independent. So when I became a prosecutor, I just want to always have that perception that I am a fair and balanced prosecutor, regardless of political ideology. And so I've always been an independent prosecutor, except for a 3-month period of time where I was exploring the idea of going against the famous Miss Lawal back in 2012. But she's there. She knows that she turned my case down, so she knows she's there. But anyway, that's water under the bridge. I did not do that. But then for 3 months, I was exploring the idea, and then I stepped back into becoming an independent. And so when I came back from Pakistan, I wanted to run for Pima County. I want to run in my party. I wanted to run in my party. So as far as being a member of the Democratic Party, I was a federal prosecutor for a long time, and the Hatch Act prevents us from getting involved in a lot of political activity because of the Hatch Act. And so it's restrictive because the DOJ doesn't want to be perceived as having their attorneys involved in political campaigns or issues like that. Now, we can be involved in issues. If there's an issue like abortion, nothing prohibits us from getting involved. But for the Democratic Party, for like candidacies and stuff, it's a big no-no under the Hatch Act. And so as to answer your question, Michael, it was restrictive. Not saying that I didn't want to, it's just restrictive. So
Understood. Well, I guess that brings us to maybe some of the fun stuff for the evening. I mean, obviously, prosecutors are kind of a hot topic in terms of political commentators these days because there's so many Trump criminal cases pending. I mean, 91 felony indictments. That's not nothing to sneeze at across multiple jurisdictions. Is there anything that you would want people to know, I mean, obviously, you're not going to prosecute any of these cases, so your office isn't going to be involved. Is there anything you want to tell people about, the idea and the prospect of a potential presidential nominee facing all these criminal charges that you think is important for the public to understand?
Well, I'm a career prosecutor. I think it's unprecedented that we have a candidate for public office who's been indicted in several jurisdictions and is currently under federal indictment. So I think it's unprecedented. I mean, that's the extent. That's the extent I'll go there. And I don't usually like to comment on ongoing, even if it's not in my belly, if it's not in my jurisdiction. It's just we just learned early on. I think Barbara Wall could probably attest to this. We don't usually comment on ongoing stuff, even if
Well, get used to the question. It's going to be coming.
yeah. I mean, at dinner, if you can catch me over a whiskey or a glass of wine, you may catch me a little bit more loose tongue. But as of right now, I usually don't like to comment on ongoing stuff. But I think it's unprecedented that a candidate for the president of the United States has been indicted in several jurisdictions. So,
Do you have a family here,
oh
Michael?
yeah, I've got. Well, I
I
really.
didn't see any dogs or kids coming and going.
If you saw the extended DNA family of my family, you would say thank you for not breeding. I think that's what you would say about me. But no, I come from a decent family. I got three brothers, a triplet, and I'm always afraid of the multiple birth thing. So I have a wife of nearly 19 years, and because I was gone for so long, we were thinking about getting a dog again, but I was gone for so long, it was hard to have care. I mean, I was gone for almost 2.5 years. So, but now I'm back. And so we're thinking about doing stuff like that. But now I'm too old sorry, Sue, we're getting into some family planning here. I think I'm a little too old for that, for the kids now. But I like other people's kids because then I can spoil them and kick them out of the house. So, am I allowed to say this stuff where I'm running for office? I should be.
Yeah. So it looks like we have a hand up, Mo Asnani.
Hey, this question is for both mics. All right. And obviously I know Jette's the one who's supposed to be answering this, but as far as, as a Democratic Party, we have seen a surge in a lot of prosecutors and other roles, which are saying, let's not prosecute as much, let's let people out. And the Republicans and others are giving us the reputation of being, the party of crime to some degree. How do we offset that? And what steps, do you think make sense to to go back to the middle and to some degree? Because being labeled a party of crime, and I'm also the chair of the Coalition Against Retail Theft. We're dealing with convenience stores, having people steal and time it with the city bus so they can get away. We're having, all kinds of issues when it comes to assaults happening on premises, elderly people being assaulted at, Evergreen Mortuary, for example. Like I get to chair this thing and every month I hear about these horrendous things happening. And I feel that because there is now this perception that we must be softer on certain groups, that victims and elderly folks and others are being physically assaulted and not necessarily getting any kind of justice for it. So how do we go to the Democratic Party, and how would you, Mike, Jetty, and then also Michael Bryan, how do you think we go back there? Because you're obviously a leader in this community. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Thanks, Mo. Yeah, I'm not running for anything, just so everybody knows. But yeah, Mike, I'd be happy to hear your answers to that. It was a great insight.
Well, I think it comes down to the individual voters who are what they expect from the positions that they're running for. So, for example, in this position, it's a prosecutor, and this is a position that requires prosecution experience, and sometimes you have to forward lean. You hold people accountable, but that's neither a Republican nor a Democratic idea. That is holding people accountable and making sure victims are given their voice. And so, I don't know why we think that is some as a conservative view. I don't. So holding people accountable is nothing. So we need to reorient ourselves. Now, when it comes, the big difference between Dems and Republicans comes in the form of sentencing. And how should we fashion an appropriate sentence for people? And so some people think DOC, DOC, DOC. You hear them all the time, and sometimes DOC is not the appropriate sentence. And we want to make sure we fashion an appropriate sentence for people because we understand those collateral consequences. I'll just give you an example, Mo. A legal, lawful resident who gets arrested here, who's been in the country for 30 years and gets in a DUI, for example, and that DUI causes him to be deported. So, and that consequence of a family man, I'm not saying DUI is appropriate. When I talk about these examples, I'm not talking about the underlying crime being appropriate. I'm talking about the collateral consequences. As a prosecutor, we need to be cognizant of those. So if that individual took a plea for a DUI, he'll be deported, and that he could be the breadwinner of the family. He could be someone, and all of a sudden he's got kids in school. Whatever happens, and that whole family has to make a decision to up and leave with the father or stay here without the father. And so these are consequences that break up families and communities, and those kids, it becomes a domino effect later on. And so we need to be a cognizant of that. But to your question, Mo, it becomes holding people accountable, and that should be in either Republican or a Democratic view. How we treat them afterwards, that's a difference between the two parties. But there should be no difference between Republican and Democrat on holding people accountable, committing a crime, especially against a victim. So I'm not quite sure I even answered your question. I just got off on I'm looking at Michael. Michael looks like he wants to answer it too. So
No, I don't actually, but I do have a follow-up unless Mo wants to ask a follow-up on that.
I think the context, right, that I'm asking it in is this, because I've asked a lot of people. I'm like, "Do you know who our county attorney is?" And most of them are like, What's that?" Because when you're going down the ballot, how many people actually remember who they voted for, right? Like when it comes to not the president, not the Senate, all of those types of ballot questions. And here's what I'm seeing, right? This is just my perspective. Is that people are either blaming mayor and council, they're blaming the board of supervisors, they're blaming, even President Biden for some of the lawlessness and stuff that's going on. And I think my frustration as a Democrat is now we're seeing, obviously somebody unhinged, in my opinion, on the other side running to be the president of the United States. And on our side, we're taking this responsibility and sharing it, even though it really belongs in one office. And that's where I'm going with this is like, I don't want to hurt the party brand anymore. And it's already been hurt here locally. And then obviously there's places outside of here that's being dealt with, but we only have control over Pima County. So I think it's from that prism, how do we educate people about the civics of, hey, this is actually this person's job. You can't blame Mayor Romero, you can't blame Rex Scott, you can't blame, President Biden or Mark Kelly. How do we that's really, and I know that's not an easy question, but I'm not here for that. So yeah.
Thanks, Mo.
I think my only response to that is I'm not a legislative. This is not a legislative position. This is a rule of law, and so I can only, when you come into my sphere of influence, how I treat you is I'm going to treat you as a human, and we're going to do our best. But I'm not setting policy. I'm not setting. For example, one of the big things that really irritates me is we get caught up in this crime stat stuff about crime stats in Tucson, and and when it goes down, everyone claps themselves on the back. When it goes up, they blame other events and stuff like that. The Pima County Attorney's Office is reaction oriented. The only time they actually get in there to help prevent some crime is when you do a bunch of drug rehab. I mean, that is where you see the biggest bang for the buck of reducing crime. For homicides and burglaries and those things, we're reactive. So if it goes up or goes down, I mean, there's little things in the Pima County Attorney's Office. What we don't set policy. We're not addressing homelessness. We're not addressing food stamps and food insecurity. We're not doing those things at the county attorney's office. Now we can be part of a task force to help with synergistic response, but that's not our job. That's mayor and council, that's the board of supervisors, that's the state legislature, and that's the governor. Those are the legislative positions that are responsible for our community standards. I'm making sure that we have a safe environment So we have safety, and the business can do their businesses, and we can go shop and walk around. For example, I'm sorry for being on a soapbox. We had a young lady who was one of the Barbara LaWall's most renowned prosecutors in her office, one of the most renowned prosecutors. And she was physically assaulted walking downtown Tucson a few weeks ago, and she's blind, and she got, without notice, she got assaulted. And so that, and do you think her life has been materially changed? Absolutely. And so those are things that concerns my wife when she goes out. It concerns me when I go out, but I'm a big guy. I've been working out. But for my wife, for everyone who goes out and shops around, walks around, we want safety and prosperity, and then get out, let people go, let people live. So Mo, I'm not quite sure. I just keep talking. It feels like I'm having a drink with you or something. But all right, sorry.
This is Barbara Lawall. Hi.
Okay.
I don't have a question, but what I would like to say is it is absolutely critical and really essential that that office is run by a prosecutor, not by a defense attorney. The other thing is it's an administrative job, and it needs somebody who has managed leadership teams. And part of the problem that we're having right now is the current county attorney has no idea what being a prosecutor is really about, and is not a manager and a leader. And so the office is in chaos, it's in disarray. And I'm supporting Mike because he has the qualifications that the office really requires. And I just hope that he can get the word out to the entire community so that they understand that, because it's critical, it's essential, it's important, and we need a change in leadership very much.
Well, that sounds like a live endorsement. Were you aware of a Barbara's endorsement, Mike?
I know. I think this is the first time I hear it. This is nice, Miss Lawal. Thank you very much. So
All right, we broke a little bit of news here on.
This is a person who rejected my case. I don't know if you remember that, Miss Lawal. So don't worry, Miss Lawal. I'm playing.
I sure saw, what, was it a burglary?
It was a burglary, yes.
Mike, I heard you earlier say that there are cases that you don't prosecute because you don't have the evidence or something's wrong. So I'm sure that evidence was lacking in your case. Nothing personal.
I'm not holding grudges, Miss Lawal.
Yeah,
No
grudges.
grudges.
Maybe.
This is Michael. You're witnessing amending fences, Michael. You're witnessing.
All right. Well, I guess I do have a little follow up on what Mo was talking about, and to some extent, when you seek an office like this that is responsible for public safety, you kind of own the situation regardless of how it goes. I mean, whether it's your fault or not is debatable. Whether or not the policies a particular prosecutorial office pursues actually changes behavior is, I think, a possibly a dubious presumption. But nonetheless, once you own the office, you're kind of responsible for what happens, regardless of whether it's your fault or not. And so I guess the question that I would follow up with on Mo's query is, how do you approach framing the issues for the public so that they understand the kind of potentially spurious nature of that connection between the policies you're pursuing and what's actually happening safety wise in the community, like this organized retail theft? I mean, I think a lot of that has to do with the way the economy is, some changes in technology, some changes in the way that security is done, on the ground in the stores, and not so much, what prosecutors do. This is a emergent phenomenon all over the country. And so, how do you communicate with the public that disjunction between what you're doing in your office and what they're seeing in their community safety wise, if you feel there is one?
Well, I don't know exactly the core thrust of the question. However, me try to answer using retail theft as an example. So, I mean, we have a recent phenomenon of organized retail theft, which is plaguing a lot of businesses. And so what people do not understand about organized retail theft is not only is it an opportunity cost loss because they have to replace inventory, but there's security enhancements, security guards, repairing damages. I mean, all these things cost a small business which operate on a razor thin budget. These are stores and places that my wife and I like to visit. I'm sure everyone online likes to visit too. But they go out of business if they've got to continually deal with loss of inventory, damage, security, and all those things. So, as a prosecutor, if law enforcement responds and we find individuals who are committing organized retail theft, those are serious consequences that I'm going to hold those individuals accountable for. And then we're in my world. And I hope when I hold them accountable, it reduces the number of organized retail theft events in the future. If you don't do anything about it, if you don't prosecute anyone, it's like just allowing them to continue on and on and on. And so what you need to do is when you catch them the first time, you gotta do something to hold them accountable. I'm not saying you throw them in DOC. I'm not saying that at all, but you have to hold them accountable because you want to make sure you change behavior going forward. And it may take some time, but you can change behavior. Your response should not be, they're on drugs, I'm not going to prosecute them, or this is a situation where they're trying to feed family or whatever it is. You cannot allow that to happen. Those are mitigation circumstances for a sentencing judge for sure. However, I've got loss, I've got a business on a razor thin budget. And so these are things that we need to balance as a community. And plus, I like to go shopping downtown. I don't want business to be shuttered because they couldn't afford. One more story. I went to a small business breakfast and a bunch of small business owners. And one individual said when he got broken into, he had to put up $12,000 worth of fencing around his property. $12,000 worth of fencing around his property because it was continually being broken into over and over again with no prosecution. I don't think, I mean, is that what we're asking our business owners to do? Now, I hold them accountable and let's turn this tide around. Especially, I think Mo, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're a small business owner too. So these are serious consequences that we need to address. So
I don't know if I'm a small business because we started with 3 employees and today we're a little under 200, but we're downtown and everything, that Mike just said about the costs, the incremental cost of security, insurance. As soon as your zip code has enough crime in it, your insurance will go up the next year you have to renew, regardless of whether or not it happened at your location. It can happen to your neighbor, right? So and that gets passed on to the customer, which is, our community. So that's just some food for thought. Anyway, sorry about that.
same goes for residential burglaries. I mean, if there's a lot of burglaries in a neighborhood, I mean, it impacts prices of homes and people willing to live in those neighborhoods. I mean, these are collateral consequences of victims. So, sorry, Michael, you're about to ask a question.
Yeah, Rick Unklesby had a question in the chat. He says, I've talked to some young attorneys in the office. I assume he means the current county attorney's office, who say they have no mentors. How would you solve that problem?
Well, I think I'm a wonderful mentor, Rick. But you want to bring in, if need be, you want to bring in defense bar attorneys, people who are seasoned former prosecutors who retired, and you bring them in and create a mentor-mentee program. And so I think, Rick, you just volunteered yourself to be available to be a mentor in the office. If I were to there, then you can come in the office and mentor a few of our prosecutors. But that's a wonderful idea. So if you don't have in-house experience and talent of the years of experience that Rick and Amelia and all these attorneys who have left, Bruce Chalk. I mean, if you don't have that skill set, you bring them in, you recruit them, and Rick is going to be one of our first mentors, it seems. Or should you be a mentee, Rick? I'm not quite sure.
I think he's volunteering. He said okay in the chat.
But no one wants to be my mentee, though. I don't think, Michael. No one wants to be my mentee. So.
All right. Well, we've covered a wide array of topics. Is there anything else that's burning a hole in your pocket, as it were, regarding this race or the issues facing the two people in the primary for the Democratic candidacy that you want to bring up?
Well, I think when you had a question, Michael, earlier about the differences, and I think the big differences are, prosecutor versus defense attorney. And I've been a prosecutor, a victim-oriented prosecutor for 16 years, and I have done. I think one of the things we don't talk about is elder crime, and I traveled to Jamaica and to London and going after and extraditing people who do confidence scams against our seniors, our my parents and my grandparents. My grandparents no longer around, but now my parents are the age where they're vulnerable to confidence scams, and so I've prosecuted tens and tens of these individuals and brought them into the United States, and they're serving lengthy prison terms. And so I want to create an elder crime task force specifically for that. There's been a lot of lauding over the financial crime unit at the county attorney saying we got $1 million in restitution over the past 3 years. And I mean, that's great. I mean, any restitution for any victim is terrific. But Michael, I can't. I mean, it's millions and millions and millions of dollars for restitution. My experience. I mean, I've traveled the world and prosecuted some really big cases and brought in millions of dollars back to victims here. And so I've got the skill set for financial crimes, for elder crimes. One of my best cases to prosecute because I hate burglaries. I hate them. I hate them. I hate them. And maybe it's because I think Rick Unklesby told me I should have a conflict for all burglary cases because I've got this passionate thing for burglary. So,
It's
so
a
I
real
mean,
invasion. I mean, it feels horrible to be burglarized. It's happened to me, and yeah, it's a real violation of your personal dignity. Yeah.
yeah. And as Ms. Lawal said, I mean, DOJ sent me overseas to set up prosecution offices, to train prosecutors in countries like Pakistan and the Philippines, work on some serious terrorism cases, extraditing some really bad guys back to the United States for prosecution. So here is a candidate with a wealth of experience in education. And on the other side, we have a defense attorney. And so those are two big glaring we're different. We're fundamentally different. And when we come to, and people don't know this, but my role as a prosecutor is holding people accountable, and people on the defense bar will know this absolutely is true. When it comes to sentencing, prosecution should have no role unless I'm speaking for a victim. And so that is a job for the judge. I only know this defendant, for example, Michael, if I see you in court, I know you for a snapshot in time. I know you for just a small period of time. I don't know your background. I don't know the mental anguish or the abuse, if you had abuse as a child. I don't know that stuff. I shouldn't be commenting on that. That's for you and the judge and your defense attorney. My job is to say, you committed the crime. Judge, you do the appropriate sentencing. If there's a victim involved, I get involved, but the sentencing is usually between the judge and the defendant and the defense attorney. So I hold you accountable. And that's what most of my job is. I charge appropriately, I charge with compassion, and then I hold you accountable. And that's what my job as a prosecutor is.
Looks like Susie Anderson may have another question. Susie?
Thank you. I was wondering about the cyber crimes. They are so difficult, and they come from all over the world. Um, do you have experience with those, and what kind of issues would the office, if you had the office, do you foresee?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is yes, I do. And luckily for me, my experience came from the federal system. So under the federal system, I can extradite people from different countries. And so as a Pima County attorney, I wouldn't have that kind of reach overseas. However, you would partner up with our law enforcement partners at the feds. But I've prosecuted I don't know how many cybercrime cases, both locally and internationally. So I'm well aware. It's difficult. The issue is not the crime; it's the identity. That's the issue. And so I need to figure out who's behind the keyboard. Usually on the cybercrime cases, but it's easy, Sue. One of the most easiest way we do is, can you guess? We follow the money. And so wherever the money ends up, we go after the guy with the money. And if that's not the guy actually committing the crime, then usually I will punish that guy to the ends of the earth until they tell me who's the guy behind the keyboard. And so we just follow the money. It's as simple as that, but it takes time, and if it's a crime that goes over international, we need to partner up with our international. I was in Pakistan, and we got requests all the time to extradite individuals in Pakistan who were committing cybercrime on U.S. victims. And so this is nothing new. I've tons of experience working on cybercrime cases. So that's a great question, Sue. And it does impact, also, I want to circle back around. It does impact the elderly more than it impacts anyone else. So
Thanks, Susie.
we're having a relationship, Sue. This is a relationship. I think this is our fourth question, Sue.
All right. Well, I did want to ask, I guess, given that your experience in prosecution has been largely federal of recent, are there things that you see going on in prosecutorial offices here in Arizona, especially at the county level, but also at the state level with our new attorney general, that you find admirable or interesting, or things that you may want to imitate, or policies or procedures or programs that you want to borrow and bring to your office?
I don't know enough. I mean, being gone for so long and if talking to stakeholders like, Rick and people who've been in the office there, Pima County, and I don't know a lot of things I would take and keep from Pima County Attorney's Office as it stands right now. I don't know. I mean, I think you've lost so many prosecutors there. I think the environment, it's just not I mean, I'm not quite sure people wake up on tomorrow morning. I'm not sure people wake up with a coffee in their hand, excited to go into work. I'm not quite sure. I don't know. However, going back into Santa Cruz County, because I'm working on the rancher case, I see what I see what positive managers can do for an office. Santa Cruz County's got some wonderful prosecutors down there, and it's literally a family. And so it's like this is a close knit family. So the number one thing to keep an office humming and moving is to make sure that staff and attorneys love what they do, are supported by their county attorney, and are recognized for it. But as far as what this office is doing, I mean, obviously, Michael, I'm running for Pima County Attorney, I'm trying to be as fair and impartial as possible, but I'm not quite sure what I've seen positive out of that. I just know, for example, I'm gonna go back to this. Miss Lawal she created, with Amelia Kramer, created this wonderful drug rehab program from deflection all the way, fortunately, to prison. These 12-step program with DTAP, drug court, and steps, and that number's been halved. It's been halved. I mean, it'd be like, what I want to do is recreate that success and throw in thousands and thousands of people into that program. I mean, that's what we want to do, is rehab people. And so I don't know, I don't know if I answered your question, but I think it goes back to the morale, leadership, and people who feel confident that their leader, and if you have a deputy county attorney and they see their boss is a career prosecutor, international work, helping terrorism cases, doing cyber crime, helping the elderly out in cases, I think that gives them confidence that their leader is someone who's got some experience.
Thanks. It sounds like Mo Asnani's wife has a question. He wants to see if she can jump on and ask her question. Go ahead. What's your name?
Hi, this is Adriana, Mo's wife, and I just had a quick question for you, Mike. I unfortunately lost my father in 2021 to a fentanyl overdose, and then in 2022, I had a young cousin who was 21, living in a separate city in Arizona, also passed away from a fentanyl overdose. And then in 2023, a very distant cousin of mine in Kingman, so now I've had 3 family members in the past 3 years pass away from fentanyl overdoses. So it's something that's very near and dear to my heart. And I'm very curious how you'll be looking at addressing the fentanyl crisis.
That is I'm sorry for all the loss in the family, and Mo's never shared that. I'm so sorry about that. But as far as fentanyl goes, I mean, just with any dangerous drug, I'm going to prosecute the people who sell it. I'm going to prosecute the people who sell it. People who are addicted, I hope to get them into the system so then we can start treating them. But people who sell it, and it reminds me of there was a state legislator offered a bill for debate. I think it was HB 21 or 2021 or something like that, about if a drug dealer laces a drug with fentanyl and the resulting consequence is a death, that person can be charged with murder. I'm 100% supportive of that. And I'm not saying death to drug dealers, and I'm not saying that at all. However, if you purposely spike a drug with fentanyl to make it more addictive, the answer is yes, you are causing additional harm on a victim. So I'm not saying all drug guys go to death. I'm not saying, I don't believe in the death penalty whatsoever. What I'm saying to you is charging them with murder is what I'm talking about. And so if someone spikes someone with fentanyl, say meth or cocaine or whatever, or marijuana, and they spike with fentanyl and it causes their death, I'm gonna hold you more accountable because you're making it more addicted to the individual. As far as the drug dealers, I'm gonna hold them. I don't like candy stores in my neighborhood. I don't like guys slinging dope in my neighborhood because it creates a bad problem for all the residents in the neighborhood. If you're addicted, I'm gonna try to treat you. I'm not gonna try to prosecute you. I'm gonna try to treat you. So I hope I delineated the two. I hope it makes it clear. So
You did, and thank you, because I wasn't even aware that, other drugs were being spiked with fentanyl, but I really appreciate your response on both sides of that. So thank you.
you're welcome.
Thanks for joining us.
Yes,
Well,
thank you.
you bet. I think I guess it's about time to start thinking about wrapping up. We're about 70 minutes in, so I don't see any further questions in the chat or in the room. So now I'm going to ask you if you would be interested at all in having more of a dialogue with the current incumbent in terms of a a debate, a panel, something where the two of you can meet face to face and have a dialogue about these issues.
Are you kidding me? Yes. I mean, I think dialogue and transparency is what we want. I mean, that's what I want Sue to see, both of us together and answer her questions. I want to see, for me, I want to see so people can see the difference between the two. And so I'm sure Miss Lawal's, Miss Conover's got some good qualities, but we're talking about is she the best person for the job? I mean, this is not a personality contest. This is, are you the best person for the job? And I like to see people see us together, and it's odd because Michael, people don't know this, but I don't know how many years she was a defense attorney. I don't know how many years, but I saw her one time in my entire 16-year career here in Pima County. I saw her one time in court, one time. I've had hundreds of trials. I don't know if she's had any trials. I don't know if she's had any trials whatsoever, let alone no prosecution trial. So there's a huge difference with the confidence, the ability to prosecute difficult cases, the ability to lead law enforcement and direct them on investigations. So I want Sue, I want Bridget, I want everyone to see us together, and so they can see us answering questions. And Michael, I think the forum could be great. I mean, it could be a town hall, or it could be mano a mano. We ask each other questions and talk about some of the facts and some of the ways we run an office.
Well, Democrats are greater too, so I would be happy to facilitate that process. So I want to thank you for joining us today, Mike Jette.
There's one caveat though. My murder trial starts in March, so
okay. I will keep that in mind.
So.
Right. Do you have any like a closing statement that you want to make before we let everybody go?
I encourage everyone to visit my website, mikejette.com. That's MIKEJETTE.com. I think I have a Twitter handle. Is it called Twitter or X? I have no idea.
It's X now, yeah.
X. I don't know what people do with all this social media stuff. I don't know. And I think there's I for the first time in my entire life, I got a Facebook thing. It's a political Facebook thing. So visit me on the Facebook. On the Facebook, is that an appropriate way to say on the Facebook?
I think you're not hip.
I'm not hip whatsoever. But I do know I've got a website. MikeJ.com. And I encourage you, I'll be posting videos and things like that. So, and like especially for independents and people who are independent about picking the Democratic ballot and things like that. So anyway, I encourage everyone to go on there. They can ask a question. They can go on Twitter and ask a question. My email's there. I encourage everyone I try my best to respond to every single email, every single inquiry, because give me some time. If I'm in court, give me a little bit of time to respond though. Sue, if you got 15 other questions, I'm more than happy to answer. Are you writing them down? I see you're writing them down, Sue. She's right.
No, but I hope you will come to our happy hour at Brother John's on the 21st, and we can pick your brain there.
We have a live mixer every month with DGT at Brother John's on Stone. So yeah, you're more than welcome to come. I'll put you in contact with the coordinators for that event.
So I don't think Michael wanted me there, but Sue, I'm gonna go because you invited me. See, Michael never told me about that, Sue. So I'm gonna go.
I override him all the time.
It's her
I'm gonna see
prerogative.
you the 21st, Sue.
Hmm.
That's all I got, Michael. Unless there's any last minute questions or anything from anyone else.
Anybody want to weigh in before we let everybody go?
I appreciate the time, Michael. I appreciate all the questions, and I do know everyone's got a busy schedule, and I know this is, when you get local, it's not as sexy as the big presidential stuff, but I appreciate, because this is maybe the most important election for people in their daily lives, because this impacts
Oh, yes.
all of us all the time. So I
Yeah.
appreciate
So,
it.
and if you know people that would be interested in this, but weren't able to catch it, we do repost these on YouTube and on the dgt.org website. So feel free to direct them, and they can watch what was said by Mike.
Can you Photoshop me, Michael, too? Is that
Yeah, I can do that.
perfect?
Remove 10 years. Yeah, no problem. All right, thanks for coming out, everybody. Good night.